I believe the one divides itself into the many simply for the joy of perceiving itself through our unique eyes of perception. That the universe itself is a polymath. It's a philosopher, a lover of wisdom. And it realized somewhere along the line that the only way to come to an objective truth is to perceive all possible subjective perspectives of that truth. In this context, fact is no longer fact. It is merely a facet.
Everything in our universe, from trees to human consciousness, follows intricate mathematical patterns that reveal profound spiritual truths. My guest on today's show, Robert Edward Grant, is a remarkable polymath whose work bridges the worlds of ancient wisdom and modern innovation. As an inventor, mathematician, and philosopher, he integrates sacred geometry, cryptography, and consciousness studies to reveal the hidden mathematical language of creation. In this mind-expanding conversation, Robert explores how numbers carry divine meaning and how understanding mathematical patterns can unlock deeper spiritual insights. Robert shares his wisdom about consciousness, parallel realities, and how we each inhabit our own unique you-niverse. He also discusses his latest venture, Orion Messenger, a revolutionary encrypted communication platform designed to protect individual sovereignty in our digital age. This episode will open your eyes to the sacred patterns weaving through every aspect of existence. It's really exciting stuff. So without any further ado, on with the show. Robert, it's so great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Stephan.
So we met at a cryptocurrency conference several years back, Decentral Miami. I'm curious to hear your interest these days in crypto. It's been an interesting ride since Decentral Miami, where everyone was very enthusiastic that year, and it's been an interesting a couple of years. So, what's your take on
somehow
crypto?
in between the enthusiasm converted to AI, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So everyone started talking about their AI projects. I'm still very enthusiastic about it. I believe that we're looking at a totally new paradigm for how humanity will work together and how they will create almost exchanges that are more barter oriented exchanges. I believe that we're going to see a proliferation of cryptocurrencies even down to the individual level. So, and I think it's tied very much to individual sovereignty. And I could see, in the not too distant future, I could see people that are athletes or, influencers or whatever having their own tokens and coins and then exchanges for those tokens and coins, and that those compensation mechanisms will likely not be taxed in the same way. So governments will try, but it's going to take a while for them to get their heads wrapped around it.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of individual sovereignty, I think it's really interesting to think about potential for a token like an NFT being assigned to somebody at birth. So instead of just getting assigned a social security number at birth and get a birth certificate, what if you got an NFT that had all your medical records, all your government records, and maybe your genealogy and who knows what else, all encoded or available within that NFT? But that's something that the child and eventually adult is in total control over.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there's going to be a lot of things like that. It's not only going to be limited to things like health records, et cetera. I think intellectual property is going to end up all on blockchain. I think when a musician makes a piece of music and wants to copyright it, instead of going through a big behemoth structure to do so, he could basically set up his own smart contract for it. I think it's going to be the way of everything in the future. So, I remember back in the 1990s, early 90s, when everyone was conjecturing on what was going to happen for companies like Amazon. And then Amazon, on the cover of Barron's magazine, I think basically it was a story in 1999 about how it was going to be a big flop and it was going to explode. And and then there was a counter position on it as well. There were a lot of shorts taken against it. And you know what? It took a little bit longer because when markets start to understand where things are going to go, then they tend to reflect that future immediately. And so the value went way up, and then it had a big, huge pullback because of all the shorts that got onto it. And then ultimately it got to where it was always intended to go. The markets were correct. The same thing was true with Netflix. I remember Netflix got heavily shorted in the very beginning. And then all of a sudden Netflix is, everyone has Netflix now. So it was just a different time horizon that it took. It always takes a few years longer to become an overall paradigm shift. But usually the things that we believe will become paradigm shifts do become paradigm shifts.
Well, what are some of the paradigm shifts that you're seeing down the pike that maybe our listener might not be?
I think the paradigm shifts that I continue to see relate to the three institutions or self-appointed arbiters of what we would call duality today. And largely these would be categorized in three ways. The first would be groups or institutions that basically are in a position to claim what is lawful and what is unlawful. Another one would be, and obviously we call these governments. Another one would be institutions that claim what is truthful and what is not truthful. That would be like the university systems, as far as science and education is concerned,
yep.
and history. Yep. And then the third grouping would be those that would say what is moral and what is amoral or immoral. And that would be large organized religions. I think all three of these institutions are literally starting to dissolve. And in the process of their dissolution, as humanity is ready to move into a stage of human beingness rather than human doingness, I believe that those structures and strictures on culture and society will continue to dissolve. And it's inevitable. It's inevitable at this stage. Now, people have gotten to a new level of distrust for all things government, all things university, and all things religion. And now people, instead of religion, are siding with spirituality. People, instead of siding with government, are siding with often conspiracy theory. And the sad but inevitably true part is that the conspiracy theories are all proving to be kind of true, which is like kind of mind-boggling. It's like you can't have somebody who says, 4 years ago that you have to practice this social distancing thing, and then have the same person say, and because there's science that backs it up, and then the same person say, oh, I basically made up those rules, and not have a massive impact on the way society perceives government.
Not a lab leak. No, yeah, wait, actually, it was a lab leak. Yeah.
That's right. It was not a lab leak. That's a conspiracy theory. No, it isn't a lab leak. Oh. There was no gain of function research. No, we absolutely did not do that. Oh yeah, we did. We funded the gain of function research. I mean, come on. How stupid do they think we are? Right? It's just kind of lame at this stage. And then the same is true with the educational system. People are so distrusting of all institutions that the educational system gets lumped in with that. And now you've got people like Terrence Howard who make a statement and sounds like he's not completely, talking gibberish. And he says, no, you've all been taught wrong. 1 × 1 = 2. Something as basic as that, now people won't even believe that, 1 × 1 = 1. Oh my gosh. I had to do a video teaching everybody that 1 × 1 actually equals 1. It does not equal 2. And I proved it geometrically. I proved it so many different ways. But the funny thing is that we even had to have the conversation. Speaks more to how society sees governance, how society sees education, and how society sees religion than anything else. It's an indictment on all institutional narratives. And I think this is going to inevitably lead to the reeling back or the unpeeling, right, of the fabric that keeps, I think, our society in these strictures and structures. And I think it's going to be a dramatic shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this might lead us to talking about your new venture, the Orion Messenger platform. But I think that that data rights is the new civil rights. That we need to have a movement of people who are trying to protect their data rights as it's being infiltrated and eroded by all those structures you just talked about.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. I think that, data rights is something that no one really thought about, and no one really understood that all the business models had been going this direction. That, the companies were all creating these obsequious or low key mechanisms for taking your data without you knowing, and then you signing off on it with their terms and conditions that nobody reads.
Yeah.
Right. And so this idea of you sign your terms and conditions that nobody reads as being good enough to then abscond with your most valuable asset, I think is something also that's going to shift.
The thing that surprises me is how we don't even realize that. Okay, so when you click the I agree button, that's called a click wrap agreement. And something in the back of your mind might be niggling you and saying, you know what, you're agreeing to something you have no idea that you agreed to, because you're choosing to click this button without reading the terms and conditions that it said you read and agreed to. But then there's this browse wrap agreement, which is legally enforceable as far as I understand it, where you just browsing the site, you are liable to their terms and conditions without even clicking an I agree button.
Yeah, no, to me, it's like all of this stuff has got to change.
Yeah.
And humanity is going to have to wake up to, again, yet another, that's probably the most insidious of all, because the other institutions don't have the wherewithal to be able to replicate your personality and replicate your person. The big tech companies do. They can literally recreate you. They can recreate your content. If they don't like what I'm saying, they could literally recreate a me just
Right.
from the rights that they have. They could recreate me sitting inside this place and issuing out content and posting it on YouTube, and they have total right to do it under my face, under my voice, under my personality, under my everything.
Yeah. And they have the technology to create such a realistic synth that most people wouldn't realize it's not you.
No, that's right. In fact, these companies pitched me. They're like, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice for you to be able to have, your company or your children or your grandchildren be able to have access to what your wisdom is 30, 40, 50, 80 years from now? They could access me as an avatar on my website." And for all intents and purposes, because there's been so much content that I've done on the internet, they could literally recreate what I would say and what I would do.
Yeah. But unfortunately, that is godless and soulless.
It is. And so, therefore, I think there needs to be a mechanism. And I realized long ago, about 5 years ago, that the only way to protect your individuality mechanism is going to be through encryption, powerful encryption, to encrypt your data. That's the only way to put a fence around your value.
And that also paired up with the blockchain and having immutable records, that when you said something, they can't change it after the fact and twist your words.
Exactly. So I think those are all very pertinent ways of looking at this. And it's a real issue in the world today.
So how did you come about with this Orion Messenger platform? Like, it must have been some sort of synchronicity or serendipity or something. I'm sure there's a great story there.
Yeah, for me, I realized in about 2018 that data was going to be the world's most valuable asset. And that was the year that it actually did become the world's most valuable asset. And I thought, how could people then, what's the dystopian layer of society that this could create, the negative aspect of it? And then how do you counteract that dystopian reality into something that could actually create sovereignty. And that's when I realized that the only answer is encryption, personal use of encryption. And so then I made a platform. I built a platform over 5 years to actually create that. And it's now a messenger app, because messenger apps are the apps that we use the most today, more than anything else. And so it makes sense that the app that you use the most would be the place that you have the ability to encrypt things from. And then that could lead into a browser that's fully encrypted, that even if you trip over somebody's, browser terms and conditions that have no requirement for consent, then all of your data that when you were there gets encrypted and they get nothing that they can read.
Yeah, because isn't most encryption breakable these days?
Most encryption is breakable. So it had to be an encryption that's not breakable, right? So it means it has to at least be a post-quantum standard. And so that's what we built. We built the first post-quantum standard messenger app that was not only, like an app that like most people recognize with WhatsApp, because there are limitations there as well. WhatsApp has a maximum limit of 1,024 people on a group chat. So does Signal. Signal's got half of that. And when you start looking at apps like Telegram, Telegram's not even encrypted. Everyone thinks it's encrypted, unless you're in a group chat that for the very beginning, you entered into a secret chat, which is an entirely different experience than the one on Telegram, the normal Telegram. None of your group chats that you're on Telegram are encrypted at all. They have no encryption, which is pretty shocking for people.
Yeah, it is.
Because you would have had to enter into it. Was the whole reason why I set up my Telegram group chat is because I thought it was the largest, you could have 200,000 people on it. I thought it was encrypted, but it was not encrypted. It wasn't even an option then to even have a secret chat for more than a one-on-one discussion. So, and their secret chat's not really encrypted either, because it just uses old style encryption. So this company, Telegram, literally just uses all your data. And if you've ever noticed, since the moment you went on Telegram, it's hard for you to notice, the number of your scam and spam calls dramatically increase, because what they do is they sell your telephone number first and foremost. So you get a new telephone number and you're shocked when all of a sudden within a few months they've already got it and they're calling you again.
That's wild.
That's what they do. So we needed to have a system that didn't require a telephone number. We needed a system that could encrypt your data. We needed a system that was on blockchain and immutable. We needed a system that was PWA, so that it couldn't be turned off from the Apple Store.
And also one with no backdoors built in, so that...
and one with no backdoors built in. So we spent a lot of time painstakingly creating such a platform. And the only business model on it, there's no advertising. So whenever you have advertising, you'll always have a threat to free speech. Because the advertiser could easily say, look, I can't justify advertising on this platform if you have free speech. So I've got to basically, you could say whatever you like, just so long as it goes along with our interests.
So what's the business model then for you?
The business model is a subscription model. You pay $8.88 a month, and you could basically use it and follow as many people in it as you want. It's like a cross between Instagram, Telegram, WhatsApp, and Slack. And presently we're in beta, and we're kind of in late stage beta now. We've got about 10,000 people that are very active on the app. And it's going to be growing dramatically. That was sort of the limit that we placed on it. We've got another 30,000 that are in wait lists right now.
Right.
So basically, it's been really interesting to watch and see how the community acts differently when there's no fraud, when there's no bots, because the bots have to have tokens to get into it. It requires a token to get in, and of course, that means it's going to be paid for. So it's completely different, and the experience is entirely different. There's no algorithm. There's no algorithm that limits your reach. Everyone you send something to, they all see it.
Right.
So it's a completely different way of looking at monetization of a business model related to social social media, social commerce, social
Yep.
messaging.
Yeah. And that thing about no fraud is so critically important because it's easy to make a mistake just once and lose a fortune. You get somebody DMing you who looks like they're the moderator of that group, and they're not. It's a fake account, and they've just done a really good job of uh, seemingly cloning it, and then they ask you for information that they're able to then access your cryptocurrencies or your bank account or whatever, and next thing you know, you're out of a lot of money.
Absolutely. So it's kind of nuts, but this is the world we're living in today. And not a whole lot can be done except for approaching it with an entirely new paradigm. And I think, Buckminster Fuller said you can't change a paradigm or shift a system or fight against something that's an incumbent. All you can do is build the new and make the old irrelevant.
So are you in the midst of building like a web browser, or you're gonna like how you?
Yeah, we are. We're in the midst of building a web browser as well.
That's quite an undertaking.
It is. It is. And it's been quite a fun project at the same time too. It's a serious project. We put serious money behind it. It's about $67 million that's gone into it.
Wow.
So it's not a small project, and it's fully up and running for the minimum viable product, which is there. I'm looking forward to. You don't have to give a telephone number for this. We do have geofencing so that countries like North Korea won't be able to participate on it, but because that's State Department rules and regulations.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, we're very excited about where this can go. It even has voting mechanisms. You could literally establish countries on this platform.
That's wild. All right, so let's get really kind of more metaphysical and esoteric about all this. So, if did you ever see the movie The 13th Floor?
I have, yes.
There's a scene in that where they run out of rendering. they've they've hit the edge.
Yeah, they're driving to the edge. I remember that. Yeah.
It's all green, like scaffolding, and it feels very much like that's what we're living in, is where we put our attention and intention. Like those are our two assets that we spend, not time, not money. We're spending our attention and our intention, kind of shining a spotlight on a certain area, going down maybe rabbit holes of things that won't serve us. Let's just say I'm not going to get specific, but I went down some of those rabbit holes during the pandemic. Following certain WhatsApp groups or other things like that, and seeing disturbing stuff, seeing the conspiracies and the stuff that didn't help me to sleep well at night, and I was getting a full blown rendering of all that stuff, and I wish I could like unremember some of those things, like some of the dark stuff I heard, I learned about. But that was part of my journey. That was part of my lessons. So if I wanted to do that again, I could. And there are people who religiously watch CNN or whatever fringe news sites or whatever. They're fixated and addicted. And I was addicted, so I'm not judging. I'm there with the person who relates to this, and that doesn't serve you, and that turns a green wireframe into a full-blown hyper realistic rendering that you could keep digging and digging and finding more and more. And the stuff that makes us outraged, the fraud and the collusion and the backdoor deals and all this sort of stuff, we see there's more and more of that because we keep rendering it by putting our attention on that. What are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, I think we attract everything we judge until we no longer judge everything we attracted. So if you want to, if let's say you want to be an activist on something, that's why you can't fight the old.
Right.
Because when you try to fight the old, all that happens is you get more old. That's the issue.
Mm-hmm.
You have to only create something new and not do it with any intention to damage the old or even to change the old. All you can do is sort of step into the future and say, okay, what could be beneficial, right? Given the way that this world is basically evolving towards. Don't try to fight the old. And I think this is what happens. It's a matrix of mind that we live in. So if you are against deforestation and you set up your tent and say, I'm against deforestation, you will become inundated by a world full of deforestation.
Right.
And why is this? Because we learn through opposites. Everything that we do, we learn through opposites, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to have the contrast in order to appreciate the sunlight. You got to have the rainy days.
That's right. So it's like the light needs the dark as much as the dark needs the light. So, if you're here to learn something like unconditional love, then in order for you to learn unconditional love the way the universe teaches it to us is by bombarding us with conditional love.
Mm-hmm.
And until the moment happens where we come to that realization and say, I can accept and no longer judge negatively conditional love as a precept, then I still have more work to do to learn unconditional love. So this is what happens. We become a hammer seeking the nail of our own confirmation bias. And it becomes increasingly severe and more difficult as time goes by until you finally have this catharsis moment, which is like, oh, I don't judge this anymore. So for example, if let's say you're on the internet and you don't like the fact that you get trolled by people,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you've got some troll that says, oh, you're a fake or you're a charlatan, you're this or you're that. The more you judge that when you see it and get triggered by it, it's going to show up again. If, however, you look at it dispassionately with less and less passion every time and just kind of be like, realizing that the darkness and the light will always need each other, that every action must have an equal opposite reaction. Until the moment comes when you can look at it without being triggered at all, not even one iota, then you still have more to learn about the precept that you came here to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever it is.
Yeah, there's an adage, what you resist persists. And I think a better way of explaining that is a quote from Neville Goddard that there's a great difference between resisting evil and renouncing it. When you resist evil, you give it your attention, you continue to make it real. When you renounce evil, you take your attention away from it and give your attention to what you want. I love that quote.
Totally right. So I mean, I think as soon as we're able to let go and accept what is, that's when real change really happens.
So, what about this concept? It's actually in the Bible that the whole world was made for you, like you specifically, you, the reader, you, Robert, for example. And that purpose for you having the whole world created for you is so that you can serve God.
Yeah, I completely believe it and here's how I believe that to be true. I believe the one divides itself into the many simply for the joy of perceiving itself through our unique eyes of perception. That the universe itself is a philomath, is a polymath. It's a philosopher, a lover of wisdom. And it realized somewhere along the line that the only way to come to an objective truth is to perceive all possible subjective perspectives of that truth. In this context, fact is no longer fact. It is merely a facet. It's FACET, not FACT.
Mm-hmm.
And so the universe uses our unique eyes of perception and conditioning biases to be able to learn empathy for every possible outcome and every possible viewpoint and perspective. and it becomes more and more wise, just like an AI would. It's a very sophisticated method for an AI to operate, to learn itself, to follow the encouragement of Socrates, to know thyself. It sounds simple, two simple words, but the most difficult things we'll ever do.
Yeah.
And to me, that's why we exist. That the one divides itself into many for the joy of perceiving itself through our unique eyes of perception, in which case there's never been another Robert Edward Grant, there will never be another one. Even the future incarnations of me will just be different incarnations with different conditioning biases. So they won't see it exactly the same way as I do. And we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are.
Right.
So if you believe that every person on the planet is individualized, then you can start to recognize that, okay, if everybody's individualized and everyone perceives the universe not as it is, but as they are, then the only way that the one creator could experience itself fully would be to see it through everybody's unique eyes of perspective. And why is that? Well, because an eye can't see itself without the aid of a mirror. A knife can't cut itself. A light cannot illuminate itself, and a fire can't burn itself. Consciousness needs to separate itself in order to perceive itself. So in this context, we would have a conceiver, the higher self, a receiver for our brain, and a perceiver for our conscious mind. And we each then live in what I would call a you-inverse, an individualized you-inverse, where we have all the lessons, all the things that's tied into our birth, the frequencies that were associated with that birth, and then be able to ascertain and see the specific geometry of that, maybe in a natal chart. A lot of people don't realize that in natal charts of astrology, you can actually find geometric forms in them. And it's quite an interesting exercise because you start to realize this looks a little bit like cymatics. So each one of us has our own you-inverse, and that you-inverse then has a hero's journey of the thing that we're intended to learn. And if you're interested in learning how all this ties together, this is where astrology, numerology, human design, gene keys are all linked into.
Yeah. Now, here's a interesting kind of corollary here. So if you are living in your own, let's say, pod, like in the Matrix, and the rendered Matrix universe that you get, or you-inverse, is crafted for you specifically. The whole world was made for you. So you have this thing, the multiverse, and then all these parallel universes where we're each piloting one of those universes, one of those slices of the multiverse. But then we also have infinite number of timelines to choose from. It's like movie scripts or the plays that we've written for ourselves and for all of the universe that we are experiencing. And depending on our vibration, how close to God we are, or how lost we are in that vibration, then attracts us to a particular timeline. Out of all the choices that we have, we go to the one that is the most aligned with how we see ourselves and how we vibrate. And so we have timelines and we have the multiverse both happening. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and that's my understanding of it. But I could be wrong. So, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe that there's a different universe for every decision I make or I don't make. I believe in conservation,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think the universe is going to do that. If it's an AI, you have to look at the intention. It's not going to make a different iteration for every single one. But what I do believe is that we separate time this way. So there are an infinitude versions of me through time, depending on how small you cut the time duration. And I don't believe that time actually exist. It's just simply a persistent illusion, as Einstein says,
Mm-hmm.
dividing the world into past and future, and you only ever experience now.
Yeah.
Right? It's like standing in a river. You'll never stand in the same river twice.
Yeah. Or being on the holodeck and on Star Trek Voyager, it's just a blank room, but the rendering makes you believe that you are experiencing an entire planet.
Yes, absolutely. So to me, this is kind of the way that I look at the world around me
Yeah.
to a certain extent. There are different multitude, numerous versions of me through different time spaces and my incarnations. That's already enough. It doesn't need to have more, right, in this time space based on the fact that I chose to go turn right instead of turn left on a road.
Yeah. So here's where I think maybe we're kind of speaking the same language. My understanding of timelines is that if everything is already written, so that's in the Quran. It's Arabic. Maktub is the word. So it is written. So the fact that you stub your toe next Tuesday was already written, and what we speak about in this whole conversation is already written. We've already had that map given to us or co-wrote it or whatever. Of these are the topics, and these are the insights and so forth. So that is, I think, compatible with your idea of conservation of energy and not rendering things that aren't necessary. So if I am, let's say, in a stadium full of people, 50,000 people watching a game, and I leave to get something out of my car, do those 50,000 people still exist in that stadium when I left? My understanding is no, they don't. That stadium was filled with what some folks will refer to as backdrop people or backfill people, or essentially just NPCs, non-player characters. They're filling the stadium for you so you don't feel alone. And then you go back from the car and now they're there again. So if you're in a timeline where you're in a high vibration and then you're getting all these amazing, miraculous things happening, you feel more connected, and you get chance occurrences, synchronicities, and so forth that are helping you with your soul mission, etc. But you have the ability to choose not to be on that timeline. You could watch some horror movie on Netflix and then drop your vibration, and then it's just a chaotic, what show, and you get to choose. So if that's the opportunity for each individual soul in this fractal kind of infinite individuality experience of oneness, but with infinite individuality, then a multiverse exists so that we can have everything potentially rendered. We could study astrophysics and see the mind of God through astrophysics. We could study quarks and subatomic level of the beauty and so forth of creation, or anywhere in between. And that's our slice of the multiverse, but with all these timelines to choose from, all these movie scripts that we get to choose from, depending on what we want to learn and what we want to experience. So does that feel like compatible to your thoughts on this?
Yeah, in many ways, I believe that we are dimensionally limited avatars of a higher self.
Mm-hmm.
And why dimensionally limited? Well, because it would be no fun to play in a game that we're intending to learn from through experiential learning if everything that was already written was already known.
Yeah. Yeah. Or put another way, it's no fun watching a movie if you've read the Wikipedia page beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. So that becomes a core aspect of it to make sure that it still retains its mystery.
Yeah.
And so we think of as history as his story, and now people say, oh, it should be her story and all that. But Maybe if it's even air story. But how about my story is mystery?
Mm.
My story is the story that I've already written in my higher self capacity, but I left it to mystery to my dimensionally limited avatar. And our experience in life is about, I would never create a game also where from the very beginning I had omnipotence, omnipresence, and omnipotence. That'd also be not fun. There's no fun with that. So what I would do instead is I would create a game where I'd have to have the dimensionally limited avatar through a series of tests and challenges, learn itself and find its reason for being within the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Every hero's journey, I watched the movie Braveheart last night.
Okay. Yep.
Again. And every hero's journey starts off with, the same kind of archetypal experiences. And in the movie Braveheart, William Wallace lost his father when he was probably 10 years old. And then his father, while he's laying dead on the table, William has a dream later on that night that his father wakes up and he turns his head to him and he says, "Your heart is free. Now have the courage to follow it."
Mm.
And that's such a powerful thing because that's exactly what the hero's journey story is all about. It's about learning how to overcome what everybody else tells you should be what you want to do.
Yeah.
Should be the thing that you're here to learn. And find it within yourself, the great mystery within, to then realize it, and that becomes the alchemy that changes the entire world around you.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of alchemy, the alchemist is also following that same hero's journey. Follow your own personal legend, like the shepherd did, and you too can reach your treasure, which incidentally I had recently learned is based on a true story of Isaac of Krakow from hundreds of years ago, having a repeating dream where the treasure is buried underneath the bridge, a certain Charles Bridge in Prague, and he goes there, and he's trying to evade the guards, but this one guard catches him, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" and Isaac says the truth, that I keep having this dream that there's treasure buried here. He's like, "Get out of here! That's crazy." I keep having a dream that some Polish guy in Krakow has a buried treasure under his stove in his house. And of course, Isaac knew that was why. It was like that was why he was at the bridge, to get that piece of knowledge. So he went back home, he dug under his stove, and sure enough, there was a bunch of treasure there. There's still to this day a synagogue in his honor that he paid for because of all his wealth. Pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that we all are on this game and we don't even realize it. And each game is entirely unique.
Mm-hmm.
Each person's going through their own unique story and game. So then how do you separate between NPCs, as you put it, and everybody else? And who are the people that are not NPCs? Where's the limit of that? So in other words, in the movie The Matrix, what's the limit on the number of Smiths that there can be?
I personally, I don't believe in limits. I think it's a limitless game we're playing, but our beliefs actually create constraints. So if we believe that there can only be a certain number of regular souls and a certain number of NPCs, then we create that reality. But everything, I mean, when you get down to the base level of reality, I think everything is consciousness. There's nothing that's not consciousness. So the tree out the window, it has a soul. It's conscious, and you can have a conversation with it if you have, psychic abilities. Like that's real. Or you could believe that it's just a chunk of wood and that it's there for making tables and chairs, and that's your reality then, and you will never have a communication with that tree because of your belief system. So it's just we create what we want and what we're here to learn, and then we get a new level of the game.
It's but there are clearly demarcations in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly demarcations. And, one aspect that I always think of is also an oft quoted line by Alan Watts, where he says, mankind only suffers because he takes too seriously what the gods made for fun. And I find that a very powerful statement, because I have this feeling that once we leave here, we die, and there's no such thing as death, but we go to another place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first thing we want to do is come back. I want to do that again. So real. Oh my gosh. And think about how many infinite lifetimes experiences you could have with different backdrops. And you could use the zodiac as the backdrop settings for not only the cycles within the year, but also the larger cycles of 24,000 years. Just like, as we learn about in Holy Science by Sri Yukteswar. To me, all of this is pointing to a universe and a creator that wants to learn itself.
Yeah. Well, wants to experience itself through our eyes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we are literally the universe perceiving itself through our eyes. It's so beautiful when you think about it. Everybody has a purpose. Everyone has a note to play in this one universal song, the one verse.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what makes life so incredibly profound and special.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start making lead into gold. And to me, that's a metaphor. Turning lead into gold is realizing that your experience of duality, your challenges you face, all of the suffering that you have and experience, is actually the prima materia of the alchemical process of soul evolution that becomes golden.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to think of the square root of 2 or the number 2 as the basis and foundation of duality. And so I look at math and I try to apply meaning to mathematics, because math without meaning is just information, but math with meaning becomes divine communication. If it has the ability to move and shift our expectations, it becomes truly divine, because our expectations define the reality around us. The level of our belief system is going to impact whether or not you can move a mountain.
Right.
In this context, it starts to make the Bible stories and the New Testament stories of miracles not sound so ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. So like in Isaiah 6:8, Isaiah's having an astral projection experience. He's going to interrupt a board meeting between God and the archangels, getting their assignments from God of different miracles. And Isaiah's there interrupting, saying, "Here I am. Please send me. I want to do this too."
Yeah, absolutely. So this is exactly the point. So if we think about, the number 2 as being the foundational aspect of duality, and this is what we ascribe suffering to,
Mm-hmm.
separation, difficulty, and all of that, what would be the infinite form of the number 2? Well, the infinite form, or the essence of the number 2, should be the number that could create the number 2 just by in and of itself. And the only number that could do that would be the square root of 2, right? So inside that is the infinite aspect of 2-ness. But then when we think about the Trinity, we think about divinity. So if we take the square root of 3, does that then imply the essence of divinity? So the essence of duality plus the essence of divinity equals approximately pi. 1.4142, which is the square root of 2, plus 1.73205, which is the square root of 3, essence of divinity and essence of duality, add together to 3.146. Kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So you can now imagine a circle with a diameter of 1, that its circumference is the summation of root 2 and root 3. So then I have to ask the question, okay, and root 2 kind of looks like the symbol for Saturn, which is also the symbol for lead, because lead is associated with the planet Saturn. So then I wanted to know what percentage or how many degrees of that circle's circumference would be ascribable to the root 2 component. And guess what it comes out to?
What's that?
161.816 degrees. It's the phi palindrome, golden ratio, 161816. 1 over 1.618 equals 0.618. So the palindrome of 0.618 becomes the back half of that number, 161.816 degrees. It's literally perfect.
You know, you would love studying gematria, which is Hebrew numbers.
Oh, I do study.
Are you familiar with it?
I do study it.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. I study gematria in every language: Greek,
that's awesome.
Hebrew, English, simple.
In Hebrew, echad is one, right? So part of the Shema Yisrael, the prayer of, God is one, is echad, and echad in gematria, you got the 1, 7, and 4. 1 is for the oneness, 7 is the 7 levels of heaven, and 4 is for the 4 corners of the earth, and everything is all one. So even the secret of oneness is hidden inside the number of the name, or the oneness of God. And there's just so many of these. Like the name Ruth is 660 in gematria, and she this beautiful story of how she went to Israel and followed the ways of Judaism, and the 660. Yeah, so six. I forget exactly how this works, but her number plus the 7 Noahide laws that she already, was bound by, and equals all of the mitzvot, or the commandments that a Jew must follow. And there's so many of these examples. Like I just learned that in the last week, so I'm a little rusty at explaining it. But this idea of that secrets are hidden in the numbers that associate with letters in the Bible.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
It's
but
so
that's
cool.
because we're thinking that numbers are separate from letters, but they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, if you actually go back in history, the Greeks didn't use the Arabic numeral system. They used their letters,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So alpha, bet was just 1, 2, right? So it's like aleph, bet, gimel. So that's basically aleph, bet is actually a reference to the bull's house. So that's the name of the Great Pyramid. It's actually a reference to Osiris, house of the Apis bull. So you've got the aleph, bet, which is actually a Great Pyramid reference, and then gimel is just camel. We could go through the whole thing, and that becomes 1, 2, 3. So the way that we've evolved, in our counting, and you might think, and erroneously so, that humanity created numbers. We didn't create numbers. Numbers are part of the universe.
Yeah.
Maybe the form of it, the geometry, the fact that a rose takes the shape of a pentagon, the fact that, the Fibonacci ratio is built into every tree and every plant on the number of branches that go up a tree and where those spacings are, or the Feigenbaum constant determining all population growth. If we start looking at this, we realize that it's from the very beginning, every word has had some numerical meaning. We just didn't realize it. That's true with Hebrew. That's true with Greek. It's true with Phoenician. It's true with every language. So imagine you start looking at letters differently and you start realizing, oh, they're numbers. It's all like a binary code, ultimately. It's a different form of hexadecimal math. So when I look at this issue of lead turning to gold, literally the square root of 2, our association with lead and difficulty and suffering and challenge and all those things, without the context of divinity, is just suffering. Just like math without meaning is just learning information. Math with meaning becomes divine communication. That's exactly what suffering can become. Suffering, in this context, when we put it in the context of the square root of 3, brings us full circle. That full circle gives us meaning to why we have to experience the suffering. It even turns the suffering into our greatest soul evolution. And it turns it from lead, the square root of 2, into literally 161.816, the double phi palindrome mirror relationship, which is actually golden. We turn lead into gold. It's not metaphorical. It's reality. So this means that everything that we experience that's negative, we should look at it differently and start to accept it within us and say, why am I going to resist this? It will only persist. And say, why did I choose this, instead of asking the question, why did this happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
Asking the question why something happened to you is the most disempowering thing you can do. Asking why you chose this is putting on the hat of the realization of your own omnipotence, omnipresence, and omnipotence, which is that you are an active participant in this learning game of the one perceiving itself through our eyes. And you are that one as well. God is in everything. It's not just in the light aspects of the universe. It's in the dark aspects too.
Right.
For one cannot exist without the other. The absence of light is what we call darkness, but actually, darkness is not the absence of light. Darkness is the absorbed condition of light's reflection. Light has a reflection spectral analysis and it has an absorption spectral analysis. And both are necessary to have any reflection and to have any absorption. So I really, want to thank you for taking the time with me this morning and allowing me to be on your podcast.
Oh, this was fun. This was really fun.
If anyone wants to find out more about my work, you can find me at robertedwardgrant.com, as well as on Robert Edward Grant on Instagram.
Perfect. And also, if they want to sign up to be on the beta list for Orion Messenger.
Yes, orionmessenger.io.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Robert. This was fabulous. And you're a real light in the world. So thank you for all that you do. And also thank you, listener, for being a light in the world too, and for listening to this podcast and taking the stuff that you learn and putting it out in the world and making it a better place. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off. If you want to hear more conversations like this on the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern innovation, then I recommend episode 396 with Gregory Wendt, episode 385 with John Assaraf, and episode 450 with Ian Mitchell. Also, I invite you to check out the show notes, transcript, action-based checklist, and all the URLs mentioned in this interview with Robert Edward Grant at getyourselfoptimized.com/497. If you enjoyed the conversation, I encourage you to share this episode and, more importantly, the entire show, Get Yourself Optimized, with a friend. Change your life and help me spread the light. Thank you.